Tomorrow, the 4th of July, our big national celebration of freedom, happens to be one of my favorite holidays of the year. The reason I like it so much is because there's nobody trying to tell me how I should be celebrating it. Do you know what I mean? Think about some of the other holidays we like. I still like Christmas, but there's all this talk at Christmas about how it needs to be something else. It needs to be more religious. Don't say happy holidays, and whatever you do, don't buy coffee at Starbucks because their cups aren't Christmassy enough. You remember that one? Everybody trying to tell you what to do. At Thanksgiving, people are telling us, oh, you're not grateful enough. There's too much gluttony, too much football, and not enough thanks. And then at Memorial Day, we get all these messages about how it's not solemn enough, it's not serious enough. But the 4th of July is totally different. It's about freedom. So we're free to celebrate it any way we want, which is exactly the way it should be. Barbecue, camping, watching patriotic movies, fireworks. It's all good. And speaking of fireworks, when Karen and I moved to California back in 2004, we noticed that the only thing that they sell out here, the only fireworks they sell out here, they call them safe and sane fireworks, right? We lived in Missouri for several years while attending Unity Institute, and I can tell you back there in Missouri, fireworks were dangerous and insane. That was something people prided themselves in, and everybody knew where you went to get the best fireworks. You look for the guy with the eye patch and 3 fingers. Guys with eye patches and 3 fingers sell the best fireworks. Everybody in Missouri, it was like a war zone when dusk came on the 4th of July in Missouri. It was amazing. And here's something else to think about. They call it Independence Day, right? So why is there so much pressure to spend it with other people? I'm just asking. The reason that we're all able to assemble here this morning is because of something that started when they signed the Declaration of Independence. Before that, there was no such thing as freedom of assembly or freedom of religion. Whatever rights people had back in those days were granted by the benevolence of the king or the queen or some other noble person, and those rights could be just as easily and readily taken away again. And then along comes this upstart English colony in North America where they adopt this Declaration of Independence, which says this: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So imagine for a moment what a threat a statement like this must have posed for the ruling class in those days. English society was built around this idea called the class system, that some people were better than everyone else simply because of the accident of their birth. They happened to be born to a noble family. They had royal blood. They were better than everyone. They were entitled to rule over people. They called it the divine right of kings back then. People were most certainly not created equal. And yet here comes this declaration that says all men are created equal. The rights can't be taken away. Rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness belong to everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the ruling class, the royalty, but everyone. And then it goes on to add a little more controversy to the mix here. It goes on to say that the purpose of government was to secure the rights of the people, not to secure the wealth and the power of the rulers and the nobility and the royal class, but to protect the rights of the people. That was a big change. And when it came to religion, before the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, boy, things were really messed up. Especially over here in the colonies. Did you know that some of the colonies, the American colonies, actually had established their own official religions? And it was a disaster. It was a disaster. In Massachusetts, for example, the Puritans were the ruling group. It was illegal to be anything else, and it was especially bad to be a Quaker. They executed people for being Quakers, including a woman named Mary Dyer. You know what was so bad about the Quakers? Well, first of all, they had the audacity to teach that people had this direct personal access to God or the divine. You didn't need the clergy to act as a middleman. Plus, and this was the worst thing that was bad about the Quakers back in those days, they were pacifists. They believed in nonviolence. And of course, back in those days, the powers that be, the ruling powers, they needed some seriously violent people because of what they were doing to the Native Americans back then. And the Quakers were just getting in the way with their message of peace. Northern Virginia, they persecuted Baptists and Presbyterians. In Maryland, Catholics couldn't vote, they couldn't hold public office, they couldn't worship publicly. So here's the irony. Colonial America got started because there were religious groups who came to this continent to find religious freedom for themselves so that they could turn around and deny that same freedom to others. And do you think it's still going on today? Oh, you betcha. It's still going on today with all of these so-called religious freedom laws that they keep passing, which have nothing to do with freedom and everything to do with giving select religious groups free rein to discriminate against those who don't share their beliefs. It's still happening today, state by state by state. Which brings us to our topic for today, freedom and religion. I find it hard to use those two words in the same sentence. Freedom and religion. Of course, freedom of religion means that we have the right to practice any religion of our choosing or none at all. But beyond that, how much freedom do we derive from religion? This question is the driving force behind the growing number of people who call themselves spiritual but not religious. They regard religion as a form of bondage, intellectual slavery, stagnant and limiting ideas. And they have good reason for that. It doesn't always have to be that way, but for the most part, that's been the experience. That was my experience. When I was growing up, I'm a little child, 5 or 6 years old, this message is being drummed into my head that you absolutely had to go to church on Sunday, because if you didn't, you'd be condemned to eternal hellfire. And you weren't supposed to ask why. No. You were expected to obey the minister, the priest, the bishop, the pope, who in turn had received their authority from these ancient scriptures. And you weren't supposed to question them either. No questioning the ancient scriptures, because they were dictated word for word by God in a language we couldn't understand anyway, usually Latin, go figure. And then they had this long list of books that you weren't supposed to read, along with a long list of names of people who were called heretics, who you weren't supposed to listen to. You get the picture, right? See much freedom there? So much for freedom and religion. So this is the kind of environment that Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore found themselves in when they were born in the mid-1800s. And they were fortunate enough to have been influenced by one of those people whose names would have been on the heretic list that I talked about before. A guy named Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was a renegade Unitarian minister who talked a lot about freedom. And now here's a great quote. This is from his essay on self-reliance. This is something that would have motivated the Fillmores back in those days. Emerson said this. He said, "Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal palms must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Absolve you to yourself, and you shall have the suffrage of the world. People don't write like that anymore, but it's poetic. He's saying, don't just blindly accept that something is good because some authority figure tells you it's good. Don't accept that something is good just because they slap that name on it. Don't stop at the name. He says, investigate, explore, think for yourself, and then decide for yourself if it really is good or not. That's the polar opposite of how most religions work. They don't want us thinking for ourselves. People who think for themselves were called free thinkers, and that term was used as a pejorative back in those days. It was a bad thing according to the religious authorities in those days, and yet it was the free thinkers who gave us the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. We know their names: Adams, Jefferson, Thomas Paine. Talk about a free thinker. The Fillmores decided to join their company. In 1918, Charles Fillmore was reflecting back on what had become the Unity movement. And this is how he described it looking back. He said, "It is in this respect totally different from the other religious systems of the world because it does not in any respect rest its authority upon revelation. It has no dogmas nor creeds, nor are its students expected to believe anything which they cannot logically demonstrate to be true." That's from the 1918 edition of Unity magazine. So the Fillmores had this vision. They wanted to create a liberated form of Christianity and perhaps even move beyond Christianity altogether. And not everyone was interested. Some people who heard about this said, no thanks. And in this country, with our Bill of Rights, we are free to do that. We are free to be enslaved if we choose. We are free to be enslaved to any kind of ideology, dogma, creed, authority, scripture, or special revelation that we want to. Sometimes we don't even know it. Emerson may have said, "Think for yourselves, but nobody can force us to do that," which is a good thing in some ways. That's what freedom is all about. Hey, sometimes it's just easier to let someone or something else do our thinking for us. Identity politics is a great example. The question isn't, what do I think about this idea or policy or proposal? The question is, does it line up with my ideological checklist? Does it line up with my ideological identity as a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, Purple, whatever? We're free to do it that way. We are free to be as hidebound and enslaved by ideology as we want to be. And the more people who choose to exercise their freedom to do that, the more stagnant and the more irrelevant the culture becomes. And the universe just says, okay, and moves on. On the 4th of July, we're celebrating a gift that I fear we're taking for granted and maybe even throwing away. And unity doesn't get a free pass either. Just because this movement started out as a way of liberation doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. The Fillmores, they gave us an alternative path to truth, which was free from the kind of authoritarian and scriptural revelation that was forced on people back in those days. Here's an observation from someone who was a contemporary of Charles Fillmore. His name was Robert Ingersoll. He was a well-known free thinker, and he was a very popular speaker on the lecture circuit. He was one of the most popular speakers in America. This is something that he observed. He said, most people cling to the supernatural. If they give up one God, they imagine another. That's what happens. Today there are plenty of books, plenty of spiritual teachers and gurus who claim to have authority that's imparted by otherworldly sources. They have secret knowledge, or they have special revelations that simply aren't available to us ordinary folks. They claim to be enlightened. They claim to have no ego. And what they end up doing is they set up another spiritual class system. Or maybe we should call it a spiritual caste system, because you don't have what they have. They give us new versions of holy books that are to be accorded the same deference and authority that a fundamentalist gives to the Bible. The difference is just a matter of form. It may seem benign and positive, but it requires us to surrender our hard-won freedom of thought. And instead of evolving and moving forward, we're actually taking a step back. I want unity to continue to be a path of liberation. So I'm asking these questions. How free do we really want to be? Are we willing to look at where we might still be slaves to ideology, identity politics, and superstition, supervision too? That's a form of authority. Where are we willing to be slaves to those things instead of using our precious gift of reason to deal with the difficult issues that we encounter? I think sometimes in our haste to avoid the discomfort of facing an uncertain future, or some of the unpleasantness of having to deal with ideas and make decisions for ourselves, we surrender our freedom of thought. I hope that's not happening, but I'm looking at the world and I'm thinking, yeah, that's what seems to be happening. So we're going to devote the rest of the month of July to talking about ways to experience greater freedom for ourselves, and it all starts at the level of consciousness, and that's going to be our journey for the rest of the month. So I hope you'll join us, and have a wonderful 4th of July. Don't spend too much time thinking about this stuff tomorrow. Have a great time, and then get back to thinking about these important matters, and we'll come back next week and we'll take it even deeper. Thank you.